KTM isn't out of the woods yet, but I'm still optimistic. Why? I'll explain in this video. Yes, hello and welcome to 1000 PS TV. My name is Niels, and over the past few days we've seen a lot of optimistic videos on YouTube reporting that KTM is back on track thanks to the creditors' approval during the vote. Many have been spreading the news that KTM is saved, that things are moving full speed ahead again, but that's not quite the case. I'm still skeptical. I see challenges, and in this video I want to try to explain them to you. On the one hand, many viewers might not be too familiar with the motorcycle industry, so I'd like to provide a bit of background information for them. On the other hand, there are also KTM fans who might not fully understand some of the key details of the motorcycle production business model. So I'll do my best to break it down. KTM has managed to clear a major hurdle thanks to the positive decision from its creditors. Essentially, they agreed to write off 70% of the outstanding debts and hope to recover the remaining 30%. This also shows that there are some hard-nosed number crunchers out there, I'd call bankers exactly that, who still believe in the brand and its potential. Otherwise, they would have just taken a few peanuts now instead of betting on a greater return in the future. However, challenges remain, and I must say I'm a bit emotionally charged about this because just last week I was in South Africa riding Enduro with a KTM 300 XC. When you're out there in the saddle of this hard Enduro bike for a week, tackling the wilderness with 6 other riders, and you see how incredibly well it performs, you start to feel like you're living in a parallel universe. You're riding an amazing product that does its job brilliantly, and you just can't understand how the company that makes it could end up in such a mess. Then, when I get back to reality, look at the hard numbers. I think to myself, man, things have seriously gone wrong. So, what are KTM's biggest problems right now? The number one issue is liquidity. They're facing financial challenges on multiple fronts, needing money and needing it faster than ever before. Let me explain. For any motorcycle manufacturer, whether they produce motorcycles, scooters, or mopeds, the business always involves certain fixed costs. These include wages, rent, depreciation of buildings, and so on. Then there are variable costs, like purchasing tires, frame components, raw materials, and energy. Now, if you're a dominant, strong brand in the automotive industry, you have the upper hand in negotiations with suppliers. These suppliers are optimistic about doing business with you because they see opportunities in a bit of that human tendency toward greed. Sure, we'll give you 60-day or 90-day payment terms, whatever it takes, because you're a huge, successful company and we'll make good money from being associated with you. That's how it works. But now, those same suppliers have just written off 70% of what they were owed. Naturally, they feel uneasy about what the future holds, and they're now far less inclined to offer generous payment terms. Some of them simply can't afford to do so anymore because they've also been dragged into financial trouble through no fault of their own. Some of these businesses have even shut down. New companies will have to step in to take their place if KTM wants to resume production, but one thing is certain. Over the next 12 to 24 months, these suppliers will demand their money much faster. This means KTM needs a larger cash reserve to pay suppliers more quickly than before. On the other side of this equation, it's important to remember that for motorcycle manufacturers, actually for all motorcycle manufacturers, the real customers are not the end consumers. The real customers are the ones who pay the invoices. In KTM's case, this means dealers and importers. So, in a situation as critical as this, their top priority must be convincing dealers and importers of the opportunities their brand offers. In countries where KTM doesn't have its own subsidiaries, they rely on importers, and they must persuade them to take on, say, 100, 200, or even 1,000 motorcycles and pay for them as soon as possible. This is essentially the same game, but in reverse. When a brand is strong and its products are in high demand, when everything is going well and trust in the brand is solid, dealers operate on very short payment terms. Some motorcycle manufacturers even have cash-on-delivery agreements, meaning that the moment a bike leaves the factory, or in some cases the moment it arrives at the dealership, the payment is automatically deducted. But now, KTM is in a weaker negotiating position. The dealers and importers know this, and naturally they will push for longer payment terms. And that's a problem. In the past, KTM could rely on what was essentially an interest-free loan from suppliers, while keeping dealer payment terms relatively short. KTM had a relatively low financial requirement as long as the products moved quickly enough from the swing arm manufacturer to the end customer. However, if this cycle slows down, it becomes problematic. And now even more so, because payment terms are being tightened and the financial cushion is shrinking significantly. So, Compared to the past, KTM now requires more financial resources if they want to produce motorcycles in significant numbers. And lastly, or rather not quite lastly, there are also areas like the employees. The employees at KTM have been highly passionate and on average probably willing to go the extra mile without expecting to be showered with money or hardship pay, simply because their passion for the brand was so strong. Time and again, we see that cool, desirable brands have a certain advantage with their employees. They might, for example, be able to pay 10% less than some boring company where people only work for the paycheck. I believe that KTM has now somewhat lost that advantage because even those who have given their all for 20 years have had to wait for their Christmas bonus. And I can imagine that some top talent, those with options and alternative career paths, have already left or will leave, or they might simply demand higher salaries before they commit to the demanding workload ahead. So, to keep good people motivated over the next 12 to 24 months, KTM will have to dig into its pockets. That's just a fact. Finally, there are two other key stakeholders who also want to see money. First, the banks. If KTM needs more liquidity, they can turn to banks and ask for loans, offering interest and risk premiums in return. But after these banks have just lost 70% of their claims, they may not be as eager as before to provide large sums of money. This in turn shifts the financial burden toward equity capital, which in this case is also risk capital. KTM must now rely on passion, vision, and the imagination of investors. These could be existing KTM-related investors or entirely new ones. Over the past few months, the company was anxiously waiting for the banks to approve the rescue plan. Now, it must convince investors to say yes to the plan because the sword of Damocles is hanging heavily over them. The banks have negotiated a shorter repayment period for the 30% debt recovery than was originally planned. Meanwhile, KTM urgently needs fresh equity capital, essentially risk capital, from investors who believe in the brand. Several names are circulating in this regard. We know that Bajaj has invested to help restart production. There have also been rumors that BMW might be interested. However, I've seen comments in some YouTube videos suggesting that BMW might buy KTM just to shut it down and eliminate a competitor. I'm not sure if investments work that way nowadays. Maybe that's how real alpha male investors used to operate, ruthlessly cutting down their rivals. But in any company with a halfway serious CFO, I don't believe that a proposal like let's buy a competitor just to kill them off would ever get approved. I just can't imagine it. So maybe I'm being naive, but I believe that the investors who step in here will be doing so with the intention of making their investment grow in the coming years, not for some short-term cutthroat strategy. I can't imagine it being any other way. Those getting involved now want to do good business with the KTM brand in the future. That said, these future business opportunities might not look exactly like they do today, and some people will inevitably have to swallow a bitter pill. But in principle, I believe that investors are stepping in with a fundamentally positive intent because they see potential, they want to build something, and quite simply, they want to make money. What's my point here? I don't want this to turn into a doom and gloom video, so let's focus on what makes me optimistic. What gives me hope is that there are plenty of positive assets and strengths still present, both at KTM's headquarters and in Europe as a whole. However, I have to say that Europe, and especially Germany, and in the past year Austria as well, has become world champion in bad-mouthing its own strengths. Honestly, if you watch the news, you'd almost have to become an alcoholic or start taking heavy antidepressants because all you hear is how terrible Europe is and how everything here is in decline. But I don't think that's true. On the contrary, many brands and manufacturers are pushing into the European market because we still have a lot of strong advantages. If an investor were to buy KTM and relocate production elsewhere, they would lose many of these strengths. One of the biggest advantages of European markets is that they offer a large customer base with significant purchasing power. People here can afford high-end products that generate healthy profit margins. And considering how the global economy is developing with the return of trade wars and potential tariffs, it's becoming increasingly necessary to keep a substantial portion of production close to the customer. This ensures stability, avoids tariff issues, and benefits from short supply chains, bringing products directly to customers who are willing to pay for them. We're seeing this trend play out with some Chinese car manufacturers as well. They're actively trying to establish production facilities in Europe. So it's not all about moving production away from Europe. There's a strong interest in manufacturing here. Another major strength we have isn't just the financial power of the markets, whether in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, or the Netherlands. Even the southern European countries shouldn't be underestimated. When you compare these regions to other markets, whether in Asia or China's domestic market, European markets are incredibly strong when it comes to high-end premium products. That's something we should not overlook. We also shouldn't take for granted certain advantages that seem normal to us but are not necessarily standard in other production regions. For instance, we have well-functioning supply and production chains. In Mattighofen, there's a factory with a highly reliable supply infrastructure in all aspects. There are no power outages, and you can count on employees showing up on time on Monday morning, partly due to low staff turnover. There's no constant worry about whether workers will turn up or whether they've found a better paying job at another factory. There are very few strike days, stable and predictable production conditions, and a supply chain that works. You don't have to build it from scratch. That's something we should not underestimate. Some manufacturers, including motorcycle brands, have moved parts of their production to Asia, only to later bring some of it back to their own factories, because it turned out that establishing large-scale production facilities from scratch isn't as easy as it sounds. You can't just put up a factory in an empty field and magically produce skilled workers, reliable energy supplies, and high-quality suppliers overnight. This isn't just my personal opinion. It's based on conversations I've had with industry professionals who have experience in other countries. That's one of our key strengths. Another major strength, especially for KTM, lies in two interrelated areas that shouldn't be underestimated. First, KTM holds a dominant position in its core product segments. No matter what has happened in recent years, and even if not everything has gone perfectly, KTM remains an undisputed leader in motocross, and even more so in hard enduro. If you walk into any average paddock, you'll see that 70–80% of the bikes are KTM. And it's not because of great advertising, motorsport success, or media hype. People buy these bikes because they help them struggle less on steep climbs than they would with other brands. That's the simple reason why KTM has been so successful. If the company refocused on this core strength, creating bikes that make riders suffer less on tough terrain and give them a competitive edge at events like Erzberg, many of its current problems would disappear. KTM's core products remain incredibly strong. Another strength is the brand's image. It has consistently positioned itself as the go-to choice for passionate, hardcore riders. Across all model ranges, KTM has managed to keep its loyal riders happy. I hardly ever see comments saying that the Duke is boring or that the 790 Adventure isn't a blast to ride. Instead, most of the complaints revolve around how KTM handles warranty claims and how long they take to respond to issues like the cylinder head problems or camshaft issues on the 790. The problem wasn't the product itself, but how KTM listened or didn't listen to customers and how long it took to provide a premium level solution. But I don't think anyone ever said the bikes don't perform well. So what should be done now? I think the easiest way to cut costs quickly, the low-hanging fruit, would be to abandon the electric mobility adventures. That has cost a lot of money. If it were up to me, I'd just pull the plug and move on. It's also likely that KTM will need to make cuts in motorsport, reducing the number of racing programs and brands involved in various series. That alone could save a significant amount of money. And history has shown that KTM doesn't necessarily need an extensive motorsport program to maintain its brand success. KTM has always been a motorsport-driven brand, but I think it would be smarter to return to its roots, the underdog spirit. Remember when KTM won the Dakar as the small challenger or dominated extreme enduro races despite being the outsider? That's what truly fits the brand's identity. Trying to be the biggest in the paddock with the largest trucks and the biggest budgets and competing in expensive series like MotoGP is a different game. There, you're up against massive corporations where MotoGP is an image tool for the entire company, not just for the motorcycle division. As a small niche player, KTM has little chance of competing on equal terms. Look at Honda. They're in MotoGP not just to sell a few more bikes, but to boost the image of their entire product range. From my perspective, a niche player like KTM can't win that fight. BMW has already shown, intentionally or not, just how little motorsport success is actually needed to sell a bike like crazy. Take the BMW S1000RR. When it first hit the market, how many years did it take before BMW achieved anything noteworthy in the Superbike World Championship? Watching their early attempts was almost embarrassing. Yet, people still bought the S1000RR. Why? Because when BMW entered the superbike market, it had 0% market share. And now, if you go to any track day paddock, BMW is one of the dominant brands alongside Yamaha. How did they do it? Not because of Superbike World Championship wins or factory racing teams. The reason is much simpler. People stood on the pit wall, watched a guy on an S1000RR fly past someone on a CBR down the straight, and at the end of the day, he was 2 seconds faster. Not because he was a better rider, but because the bike had an insane amount of power. And it still does. That's why people bought it. Because in amateur racing, the bike simply worked incredibly well. And that's exactly what KTM needs to do again. Just sell awesome products and get them into the hands of riders. And then the women too. People out there at Red Bull events, at the Erzberg Rodeo, and all these other series will be using these bikes and winning races because the products are simply that good. At events like the Erzberg Rodeo, in my view, it's far more important to be present because there are 1,500 riders taking part, 1,500 potential customers. That's where KTM needs to invest and show up, not burn through ridiculous amounts of money in MotoGP, where at the end of the day, the right product isn't even available at the dealer's showroom. If I had any say in the matter, I'd go in this direction, create outstanding products that customers actually want, dominate the paddocks with them, and then others will follow and buy them too. But maybe I'm just being naive. Let me know what you think. And finally, in the long run, KTM needs to rebuild trust. That means reinvesting in after-sales support, even if they don't have the money for it. They simply can't afford to have customers posting online about oil leaking from their cylinder heads, saying, "What the hell, KTM has been ignoring me for months at the dealership." Instead, it needs to be, "Hey, there's a problem, there's a solution, go to the dealer, you'll get a new engine." Look at our long-term test 1300 GS. We're on our third engine now, all within about a year. But we didn't have to argue about it, we just went to the dealer and it got replaced. Yes, it's frustrating and costly, but that's the right way to handle customers. KTM, on the other hand, has been stubborn with its premium products, leaving customers frustrated. They need to regain trust, focus on quality, and leverage one of their greatest strengths, their employees. This is my final thought before you go and do something more productive than watching videos. I've been doing this job for 25 years now, and if I had to guess which motorcycle manufacturer has the highest percentage of employees who actually ride the bikes they produce in their free time, I'd say KTM. Across the entire chain, from dealers and importers to the factory, I believe that compared to all other manufacturers worldwide, KTM has the highest percentage of real riders among its workforce. After KTM, I'd say the other European manufacturers follow. There are plenty of passionate motorcyclists in the Japanese brands too, but percentage-wise, KTM is probably leading. Maybe I'm wrong, feel free to share your thoughts, but that's my impression from being in the industry. Now, KTM used to benefit massively from this. The people working on the assembly line, the ones actually building the bikes, would go out on the weekends, sweat their way up steep hills on their Enduros, come back to the factory on Monday and say, "Hey, we need to fix this works, this doesn't." That's how KTM's bikes became so refined and practical, because the people making them actually used them. But in recent years, there have been problems. The structures weren't strong enough to scale with the company, and employees couldn't effectively communicate feedback to their bosses. Everyone knew there was an issue with the 790 engine, but apparently the right processes weren't in place to escalate that knowledge into action. KTM needs to start listening to its people again, the ones who know exactly what a motorcycle needs to be great. If they do that, the next generation of Enduro bikes will have the fuel pump in the right place so that riders can actually use the last liter of fuel instead of being stranded because the pump is positioned incorrectly. These kinds of mistakes shouldn't happen anymore, and they don't have to, because KTM has enough talented employees who know exactly how to build a great motorcycle. So, based on that strength, its workforce, along with the brand's legacy and the generally excellent products, I'm optimistic that KTM can pull through. But it's a nerve-wracking situation. KTM is still not out of the woods, they have massive liquidity needs, and now it's up to the management and investors to inspire confidence and attract new capital. I wish them all the best. I hope I could give you some insights and maybe even entertain you a bit. Feel free to share your thoughts below. If you think the situation is completely different, let me know. I don't heavily moderate the comments, so as long as you keep it clean and post faster than the bots, you're more than welcome to contribute. Thanks, goodbye, and see you next time on 1000 PS TV.